As you all know so well, we live in a world inundated with data. You name it, charts, graphs, metrics, forecasts. The thing is, data alone doesn't drive change. What drives change are stories. Today, we're going to dive into one of the most essential skills modern communicators can master, and that is learning how to translate complex data into actionable, compelling narratives. Because if your audience doesn't understand the data or remember it, you won't have an impact. Hello and welcome to Power Speaking Live. I'm Carrie Beckstrom, the host of this monthly series and the CEO of Power Speaking Incorporated. And I have to let you in on a secret. This is an extra special live event for me, and hopefully for all of you, for two reasons. One, because of the very special guest we have joining us today, who I will introduce in just a moment. And two, because of the several years in which I've hosted this live event. This is the first time that I'm doing it away from my office. I am way up in the panhandle of northern Idaho at our family cabin, situated on a magnificent body of water known as Priest Lake. And I truly marvel at the advances in technology that enable so many of us to continue to do the work we love while exploring different parts of the world. So back to the topic at hand, data storytelling. Joining us today, we have Emily Schmidt, who is eager to share all sorts of examples and advice on how to translate data into compelling stories. Emily is a 12-time Edward R. Murrow award-winning journalist and consultant who both practices and teaches smart storytelling. As an on-air correspondent, Emily has appeared on CNN, ABC, NBC, Bloomberg, and countless other news outlets worldwide. Emily, as a coach, helps clients to tell their brand stories in a compelling way while navigating this very complex, ever-evolving communication environment. Welcome, Emily. It is truly a pleasure to have you with us.
Carrie, fantastic to be with you. Although after you just talked about the lake, I wish I were actually with you, enjoying that view. But this is the next best thing. It's great to be with you.
Yes, I wish you were too, but we will do the next best thing. And I posed a question in chat, by the way, to our audience. We invite you to put your questions in chat at any point in our conversation. And if you have advice and examples you'd like to share, do that too. We'd love you to join in the conversation. And we already have someone, Dawn, who is eager to hear your advice, Emily. So we posed a question at the outset I'd love for you to answer. In your experience, why is story such a powerful tool when presenting data? And what happens when it's missing?
I think it's the most important thing that you can add to your data because we aren't as good as we think we are. Our data is not as strong as we think it is. I always say when I'm teaching people about the importance of storytelling, to have a reality check. I mean, the great thing is, Carrie, no matter how amazing our conversation is today, a few years ago, so some Florida State University researchers joined up with some Michigan State University researchers, and they said, how much do people really remember what we put out there? And what they found was, listen, in 2 months, people are probably only going to remember about 25% of what we say today. So that's like they're going to take the best 15 minutes, which isn't all that surprising because if you think about the 2 months from now, that's half of a lifetime. Schools are back in session. These vacations are history. It makes sense. But this is the part that I honed in on. They say by 8 hours from now, by the time folks are eating dinner or done for the day, closing their laptop, they're already going to have forgotten a third to a half of what we say today, a third to a half. So no matter how amazing we are, they're not sticking with us. What we're telling them is not sticking with them. And so, how do you increase the stickiness? You tell stories. Give ways so that people say they latch onto that. It lights up their brain, it helps them remember, and it goes forward. So I think the reason that storytelling is so important is saying you need that extra crutch. You need that thing to make sure people take away from this what we're hoping they do. If they're going to invest an hour, let's give them the best 15 minutes 2 months from now that they can have. When you don't have it, you risk what falls into the other 45 minutes. What are you losing that you really wanted to get across? That's why I'm a big fan of stories.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that is that is incredibly compelling, especially the point you honed in on, which is the 8 hours. I mean, a mere 8 hours later. And the fact of the matter is that there are so many brilliant people that spend their career focused on analyzing data, coming up with results to have a meaningful impact. And that's not going to be achieved if that can't be remembered. If it doesn't inspire action, if it doesn't inspire change. I also think stories, depending on your audience, and we'll talk about this in just a bit, uh, uh, audience analysis is so essential to making sure that the story you choose to tell does translate in a meaningful way for your audience. And the point I'm trying to make is story two can help make complex data so much more accessible to people, especially if it's non-technical people that perhaps you're trying to present to.
Accessible and exciting. I mean, I'm the policy wonk. I'm located right outside of Washington, D.C., and I'm the person who really came to Washington liking to watch congressional hearings, liking to have the data and figure out the challenge of how to get it out there. But that's because I think it's really fascinating to dig into what are the numbers and help drive people to action as a result of it, to get to tell those stories and unearth it and frame it in a way that maybe nobody else has is can be exciting. So I think there's also getting to be the surrogate, the voice for the data can be a really impactful, empowering thing.
Completely, completely. I love that. The voice for the data. So, in your experience, what is the most common misconception people have about uh, using story when relaying data?
I think there's a couple of things. One is thinking that the data doesn't need a voice, that it can stand on its own. And I mean that's so real because if you think about it, people who come up with data might, as you said, they might have invested months or their entire career to getting to this data. And so they know it so well and believe in it so much that they really do think it speaks for itself. Just a couple of months ago, someone in an industry that is very, very uh, dialed into data. I can't really tell you about the industry because it's a project that I'm working on, but they came to me and said, "Listen, we understand that the world is changing right now. The people's opinions, policy, the economics, and the way we communicate is all changing, and we've always gotten by in our industry by just letting the data truly speak for itself. They put it out there and let it do it." And they said, we think the way things have been changing recently, especially as you look at a new administration, we think we have to come up with a different way to do this. How do we do that? And I said, well, let me connect you with someone who's really good at that in terms of finding market research. And so they did some market research, came back to this industry, the leaders in this industry, and they said, oh my gosh, we didn't even know that about ourselves. We didn't even know that's how people viewed us. And so as a result of the data that they're getting about themselves, now this is kind of sounding meta, but as a result of that data, they're able to take their data and now message it and put it out to the world in a completely different way than they ever would before. You know, they went from that whole we just have done really good work. It's backed up, it's peer reviewed. We believe in it. We can put it out there to saying it's all that. The work is still the same. They're not changing the product, but they are changing the way that they're wrapping it up and presenting it and giving it to the world. And I think that's a really important way that they're starting to learn that the data can't do it all on its own. The other way, though, is saying the data is so important, that it's too much to tell a story. We just can't even find the story. And I was thinking about that one because we get intimidated, right? Like, how do you look through pages and pages, thousands of pages of Excel spreadsheets or all this data and tell your CEO the one thing they need to know? And so I was looking at the New York Times today saying, just scrolling through online, what do they have for this? And I think this is one of the things that's really important. This is talking about Jeffrey Epstein. Raise your hand if you've heard about Jeffrey Epstein in the past 48 hours, right? And so what they did was say, who is believing President Trump when President Trump says there's no there, let it go. And so they took a look at it and said, Trump insists, I'm reading the headline right now, the Epstein case is a hoax. Here's what his supporters say. So if you're not going with the data on that, if I were just telling the story, I might say, here's what President Trump said yesterday. Here's that. Here's what one of his longtime supporters says. Here's that. And maybe here's what one other person says. And so you get a landscape that basically shows you three people maybe saying the same idea about a topic. But that doesn't give you any perspective. That doesn't tell you, well, who's really doing this. So what the New York Times did that I think was so brilliant and so simple was they took the data and they took basically 30 supporters. You can look this up on the New York Times and you'll see it much clearer, but 30 supporters, and they said, where do they fall in this circle? And so they looked at most of the people who said they're put the pressure on the Trump administration or Trump himself or other things resulting in that is all of this. The only people who said this has no further action necessary, basically agreeing with President Trump saying, let's just let sleeping dogs lie, is only these three in this. I think this is how data can be important to say, we can break down, you couldn't quote 30 people, but you can put 30 people in this really simple to understand thing and start to see where the silos exist, maybe where the silos are breaking down. And that told me that story in such a different way than I had heard it anyplace else. That is where I think data has real power. And it doesn't have to be, that wasn't a multi-day investigation. That wasn't a multi-thousand or $1 million product. It was just, how do we place it differently so that people can understand faster? That's what I think is where they got ahead of that mistake of saying, it's too much to put out there. We can't do that overnight. Yeah, they did, and it was really good.
Oh gosh, such a good example. And you said a few things that I really want to emphasize. One is that perspective. So, and how instantly you get it by looking at that visual, as opposed to, obviously, if there was a spreadsheet of the different viewpoints, or, to your point, sharing a few quotes, you're not instantly going to get that perspective and drive the point home, which also is so critical because we talk about this ad nauseum in terms of just the rate of change continues to get faster and faster and faster, and we're inundated with data. So if you have the ability to punch through that noise and get your message across quickly, allows you to be so much more impactful and effective. And I just want to mention to our producer, Brian, please interject at any point if there's questions that we can help address in chat, or comments. We'd love to hear those as well. Uh,
Actually, now that you bring it up, I think there is a theme that's showing up in the chat here that I think would be really interesting because so we've talked about how the storytelling can help with memory and retention and how it can help with context and understanding. But I think what the chat is interested in is that inspiring action piece, because that is different from the understanding or the remembering. So can you speak a little more to the driving action, inspiring action piece of data and storytelling?
Yeah, I mean, that's the real purpose, right? Is getting people to do something. We don't just want to give them the what, we want to get them to the why, or here's what you should do about it. I think of it like the three if I's, right? You're going to use your data to simplify it. So you're going to take a lot of complex things and boil it down to what you most want them to know. And then you're going to justify it, right? You're going to use the data to say, here's what I want you to do. And this is why I'm giving you the action. You're not just giving them a bunch of PowerPoint slides and saying, decide what you want to with this. You're saying, here's what it is. And then you justify, here's what I need you to do based upon all this evidence that I'm giving you. And then the part where the story comes in is amplifying it, saying, here's how this makes a difference in a broader perspective. Here's what we can do if you take this action. And so I think when you think about how to drive action, that's what you do. You got to boil it down to what the main thing is. Then you have to think about what do you want them to do with the main thing, and then start to say what's the opportunity once we get to that. I think that can be done in really simple ways. And I gave you a news example because that's my background and my love when I talked about the New York Times. But let's take an example of a corporation, a multi-million-dollar international biotech organization. And they had an idea that their board was saying. They were saying everything we do for the next 3 years is going to focus on innovation. We want to drive innovation. We want to see where innovation is happening. So they said, we are going to, as the board of this company, and think about the boards that these are very accomplished people who've done very well for themselves and are guiding the company. They said, we want to hear where innovation is happening on all levels of the company. And then we want them to present to us at the board. So I was brought in as someone to coach the people who would be presenting to the board. And the first people they picked were line managers from a manufacturing facility. And the moment that they found out that they were being tapped to tell the story of the innovation they had done, they said, no, thank you. We do not want to appear before the board, because what if we don't do well? What if we make a mistake? What if they think what we did wasn't that big of a deal? This is not an opportunity we want to grab onto. And the folks who were pinpointing them said, no, you're exactly right. We need to do this. And so my job was helping them say, how do we drive action? How do we show the board that we're doing really good things in this particular manufacturing facility that could be replicated at our facilities across the world? So what they had come up with was a way to basically simplify their line manufacturing. They said, we took a lot of work, we did a lot of research, we talked to all of our people, and we found a way to get it done faster, cheaper, better, safer, fewer mistakes. So how do you show that, right? We could have done a lot of different Excel spreadsheets or PowerPoint or now AI generated graphs that could have shown that. But I said, how tell me how you could really show this. And they said, we wish we could just show you what it was like to take a product through the process before and what it's like now. And I said, well, couldn't we, basically? So we took an iPhone and, basically walked through what the old process was like and recorded it. And then they did it again. And then we did a time lapse. And so when they were talking to the board and saying, here's how we changed what we did, here's how we innovated, what you saw going across was the old way and the new way. And the old way kept going and the new way stopped here. And they said, this is where the innovation was. In that gap is where we've saved you this much money, this much product safety, this much efficacy, this much time. And this is why we believe that we're doing things right. And what happened was the board stopped the presentation and said, wait, let us understand, is this what we just saw? And they said, yes. And they said, we want to stop and just give you a standing ovation. And they ended up implementing that in other facilities around the world, in doing more of these kind of presentations. Other people who had come up with ideas that got patents got a bonus on the spot. Other people really raised their profile. And even just these two who got it started and got that standing ovation were able to go back to their manufacturing facility and say, our board knows about us. They know what we've done. They believe in us. We got to keep doing it, right? The inspiration that came from the action. And I think that's where you can say that somebody just having me there to just say, I didn't come up with the idea. I just probed and said, how could we show this in a different way? And when we got beyond, well, we have to show an Excel spreadsheet or I have to show a bar chart, it was so meaningful and impactful. And so I think that's how you drive action, is ask that question, how can we show what we're trying to get to here? It might be one sentence. It might be one simple time lapse. It might be one photo that can say, this is basically what we're up against, is one photo. And that can become then the centerpiece upon which you hang all of the data. And I think that's how you start to drive action, is make people think about it in a different way. That board, I talked to someone a couple of years later, they remembered that presentation. It stuck past the 8 hours, it stuck past the 2 months because they remembered that time lapse. That's what we have the opportunity to do when we think about how to, as I said, be the voice of the data.
That, Emily, is a brilliant example of how you simplify, justify, and amplify and talk about influencing really, really, really meaningful action that had such a rippling effect. It didn't just result in applying this innovation to other plants. It was transformational, it sounds like, for the workforce. That's incredible. Thank you, audience, for asking that question.
Yeah, I think the other thing that's important about that is just the empowerment and the culture, the climate that set forward, right? They could have brought in a high-paid consultant who was from a big four firm that was giving them a big, really slickly packaged thing. They didn't. They did this thing that all they had to do was pay for these guys to fly up and talk to them.
Yeah.
And it really created a culture of we believe in innovation, we believe in our employees. And so it was also a way for the board to pull through culture. It wasn't just working up, it was working both directions. And I think that's an important thing to remember too about this idea of bringing about change. It might be that ripple effect that you haven't even thought about.
Whose idea was it to bring you in? Was it the board or was it
Oh,
like
it was actually someone within their learnings and innovation department who said, "We believe that this can work, but we also can't set people up for failure, right? We can't
yeah.
just put people in front of a board and say, 'Go to it.'" And so I was brought in, and it wasn't a big lift. I mean, it was probably 5 hours that I worked with them to help them come up with the idea, to get the idea out. We brought in a production company that did something very simple of just putting those things together, but helping them do it, and then I helped them prepare so that they could feel confident for questions that they might get, things like that. But it wasn't a big lift for them to have to deal with me or me to help to get the opportunity to help with them. It was just being able to frame it and get them to ask them the questions. What's the data that's most going to stick, and how can we make sure that it has that extra tackiness?
Yeah. Wow. Thank you so much for sharing that. And also, kudos to the organization for recognizing that we want to set them up for success. They're going to need some coaching and guidance to do this effectively. Wow. Okay, so let's talk a little bit more about the how to. So, how do you go from a spreadsheet with voluminous data and that into a story? Talk a little bit about your process.
I think it really goes to that idea of simplifying. I make any CEO that I'm working with tell me what the headline is for every slide. I make them tell me, I love to say 3 words, but realistically, what's the sentence that if you had to go in front of your board or in front of your stakeholders or your town hall meeting and say one sentence, drop the mic and walk out, what is it? If they can't say what it is that they're trying to get across, how is their audience going to know which direction they're leading them? So I really think the biggest thing is saying what's in it for my audience and what is it that I'm trying to say. If you can't say it in a sentence, if you really can't say it in a paragraph, you've lost. You don't know where you're taking them. So you're the blind leading the blind. And I think that's one of the most important things. And then once you get to your main idea, go to each slide. And so let's say you have a really dense data that you must show that's talking about how inflation's impacting you or the tariffs or whatever's going on, a brain drain of not enough young people or AI, whatever it is, you can still have a really important, dense graph and data that you're doing it, but what's the headline? Is it showing this is groundbreaking or this is unprecedented or this is scary? We don't know what to do with these numbers except we've got a plan, right? So if you can't do the headline on each one about what it is that someone should care, I think you leave them. Again, you're not setting yourself up for success. So I think that's the biggest thing. Simplify it, know where you're taking them, and start to build a narrative based upon the data that you've got to show them. I am not for dumbing it down. And I think, Carrie, that's one of the most important things. I kind of try not to use the word storytelling, though I love being a storyteller, because it scares a lot of people. They
Mhm.
think that that means it's somehow soft, or it's somehow once upon a time, that that it sounds trivial. Not at all. We're not storytelling. We are, maybe as as the person in chat said, we are driving action. We are trying to get results. We are trying to amplify. So it's not about once upon a time this thing happened, or I want to tell you something about myself that's going to be make me vulnerable and make you understand who I am. No, this data might be really powerful and really energizing or really concerning, or any of those headlines. That's what the story is that you're telling. So if you don't like the word story, don't use it. You're trying to drive action, influence change. And who can argue with that?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And that's a really good point. We definitely experience that as well. Excuse me, especially with a lot of engineers and scientists that we work with. You use the word story, it somehow is suggesting that it's going to be soft, superfluous,
Mhm.
whereas no, this is helping you take this brilliant work and have an impact with it. Thank you. So well said. Let's talk a little bit about audience analysis. How does audience analysis, what role does audience analysis play in shaping your data story? And how do you tailor your message accordingly?
Yeah, if you are just pulling off the same data for the same audience and saying the same thing, you are not doing yourself any favors, right? And you can use your deck might always be the same, but the way that you frame it for your audience is going to be different. And I think it helps, buy yourself that credibility that can be really important. A couple of years ago, a pharma company asked me to go to Europe and speak to their global leaders and some of their influencers. And these were MD, PhDs. I am not an MD. I'm not a PhD. And I had to talk to them about connecting story to data. And I'll tell you, this audience was basically of the mind that I just said. They didn't like the word storytelling. They were like, we don't need that. We've got data, and that's what we need to get across. So I had to think about, how do I get them to buy into me, that I'm not just this TV news person that does fluffy minute 20 stories. I know, I understand what their purpose is and what they're trying to do. And so, one of the things I did was think about, how can I get them to believe me based on something that we have in common when we don't have a lot in common. So I thought about anything that they did. They would always use, like, here's a patient profile. Here's our data that we have about this patient. And so I was I'm a basketball fan, and I grew up in Iowa, so I've been, if for those of you who know women's basketball, a Caitlin Clark fan for like a decade. Followed her when she was young, and so I had seen this graphic that was from Reddit, and I think we might have it to share. And basically, they took a look at all, like, 9,718 Division One college hoops players. This was before she went into the WNBA. And so I started off with, "Hey, I wanna tell you about a patient profile." It's a college student. She's the only daughter in a family of 3. She's college educated. Here's her height. Here's her weight. And then I said, "And I wanna show you this." But I took off where it said assists, and I took off where it said points, and I took off the explainer. And I said, this your person in this subject is not in the cluster of all these people that you see here. It's the person up here in green. And I started to say, so now, are you thinking differently about her? What sounded very ordinary, you start to say, there's something different about this. What is the data going to tell me that helps them do that? In doing that and helping them buy into this, um, and finding out that, in talking about basketball, then I could segue from that, which wasn't, they understood patience. They didn't necessarily know who Caitlin Clark was. Some of them were from, like, Romania, right? They didn't know this, but they could understand what that one green dot meant in terms of, something is different about this, and I want to learn more. I was able to use that to then segue into the data that they had to present, and how to find those same superlatives, those things that were different with them. And it worked really well. I got buy-in so much faster than if I had tried to start with just the pharma data, because guess what? They knew that better than I did. And so I wasn't going to tell them anything they didn't know, because they were going to base it on their own perceptions. I shifted it, I changed the perspective, And then they were willing to listen, and we were able to get through. So I think that's where knowing your audience matters. If your CEO has studied this slide deck that you're about to present to them for months, you don't have to start from the beginning. You might give them a pre-read and say, "Hey, here's where we got to." But then when you're in front of them, you got to hit them with what's new, what's different, what you need action on quickly, because if you waste 5 minutes giving the background that they already know, you've lost them, right? So you've got to know who needs it when, and make that happen that way. I think if you don't know who your audience is, you're in a lot of trouble. It's one of the things that's hard about this. I don't know where people are coming from. Are you coming from a comms perspective? Are you coming from being the presenter? Are you coming from a pharma, a tech, shoelace factory? I don't know. And it makes it hard to figure out how to do that. So then you've got to find ways that are new and different to try to hit the audience as much as possible.
Absolutely, absolutely. Oh, that is an example of something I know is gonna stick with me. That visual and that green dot, that's this clear radical outlier. Oh, wonderful, wonderful example. And I just want to go back briefly to the previous question in terms of talking about process a little bit. And you did such a wonderful job of bringing up a number of things we include in our workshops, like this essential about knowing your core message. What is that core message that threads throughout whatever it is you're going to be sharing? And that concept of headline assertions with every single slide that is literally conveying the main point of that particular slide. And it's not necessarily easy. It sometimes takes, you really have to think about what is it that I'm trying to convey with this slide. And if it's more than one thing, then I should be separating it.
Yeah, and well, and don't walk them through. I mean, that's why I love your model. You're not walking them through everything on the slide. You're not the show and tell like you were in first grade saying, here's everything that's here. No, it's here's this is what we looked at, and here's our green dot that we found. There's a green dot in every slide, right? There is some sort of takeaway that you're trying to convince people. And so, another way to look at it, if you don't want to find the headline, what's the green dot? What do they have to find in this thing that's going to make them understand why they have to drive to action? And if
Yeah.
you can't say it, then you better not either not do the slide or figure out what it is that you wanna say.
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah. And thank you. I love all the interaction we're getting in chats. I see we have a question from Lonnie. Another tool that we provide in our workshops are frameworks that help people to structure their story, their narrative in a clear, accessible way. Also helps to separate the nice to haves from the must haves, not including too much unnecessary data. Are there, as it relates to data storytelling, are there any particular frameworks that you subscribe to?
Not a specific, like, here's the worksheet to work on, but I think it does come down to just saying, what's in it for me, and me in this case being either you as the presenter that you need them to take action on, or what's in it for the audience. Why do they care, right? The reason that the board cared about that manufacturing line wasn't because they really cared necessarily about that one facility or the timeline. They cared about it because the innovation was leading to real tangible results and savings and things, right? So I think that that's if you can get into what's in it for your audience, why do they care? And the why is so critical. If everything in your presentation is a what, throw it out. You don't
Mm.
we're not just show and tell. I mean, if you think about if you go to a new city and you're on one of those bus tours and all they said was, "Here is this building, here is this building," you would be like, "Oh, I didn't learn a darn thing." But if they say, "Here's this building, and it's important because it's the seventh largest building like this in the world," or "It was bombed during World War II, and they built another one," like, it's the why that makes you understand that makes that tour stick. And that's kind of what that's to me is the framework that you need. If you don't have if it's all what's, you need to start over and get to the whys.
Absolutely. Absolutely. You're making me think of a general manager that I used to work for how he differentiated a mediocre financial partner from an exceptional one is the mediocre one is one that reads the news. So reads the P&L. As you can see, in first quarter, we exceeded goal by 20% versus a financial partner who makes the news that explains the why behind the data. We exceeded plan for these reasons. These are the things that we need to keep replicating throughout the year.
I know we have a couple of TV folks on here. I see Dawn is someone that I know for years of TV. And this is not my phrase. I'm taking it away from someone else, and I wish I knew who it was because I don't mean to be taking their information. But there's a phrase that the National Press Photographers Association talks to a lot that's called painting to the corners or writing to the corners. And so if you think of this like looking at me right now, right? Instead of just saying there's somebody sitting in front of you in a blue dress, you might say, oh, why is there a map behind them? What does that have to do with who they are and what they believe? Like you're telling people instead of just, to your point, here's the 20% change in our revenue from last year, you're painting to the corners and telling them why or the things that they may not realize that came into play. Was that because there was a return to office and suddenly people were 20% more productive? Is it because there wasn't a return to office and people are working better, but they identify, that telling us what's around here. So it's not just this is so critical. So I try to think when I'm doing any presentation, helping people with presentations, what's in the corners that you need to shed a light on that otherwise I'm not going to see, because I'm always going to see the person sitting in the middle of the screen. I can figure that out for myself.
I love that. I love that. And how do you do that without, because the other challenge we experience, especially as it relates to, well, just presentations in general, but in coaching people to effectively tell tight, crisp, compelling stories, uh, a real challenge a lot of the participants have is, including way too much unnecessary context, as an example, or too much information in the corners. So, how do you balance that?
One, give pre-reads. Let people who want to see all the data and dig in. If we all know who those people are. We know the people who are going to ask lots of questions, and you can say they've already got that. So then what I'm doing is providing the perspective. I am the it's like the difference between watching a movie and saying I liked it and reading the movie reviews and having the critic tell you how it fits into something differently. So you want to be the critic, but people only have so much time to find out, are they going to download this on Netflix, right? So it's still got to be fast and to the point. And so I think your story might be one sentence. It might be, we have never seen this number before, or we've been working for 5 years to get this, and this is a big deal. Or in the case of the two people who presented to the board, our innovation comes in this. You watch this and you can see it. They didn't set us up on all the Six Sigma training that they had to get to it and the process that they came to and all of the working with their team. They just said, here's what we did and here's the results, right? So start your storyline at a part where it gets us to where you want to go.
Wonderful. Wonderful. I also, on the point of framework, you did actually share a wonderful formula, the simplify, justify, amplify.
Amplify.
Yeah. Yeah. So, Emily, can you talk a little bit more about techniques you use to make data more relatable and actionable to your audience? I mean, the board example was terrific, but just talk a little bit more.
Yeah, I want to show you something because it's not all about how I do it, right? It's about, I want to show you some examples that you can see how others have done it. And I think there was a really good one that happened in National Geographic a couple of years ago, back when they were talking about how many people had died of COVID. And I mean, you hear the number 500,000, which is about where it was at that point. And it's like, what does that mean? And this happens in news all the time. It's a $6.8 million cut where the Medicaid is going to be 72% of people. These are numbers I'm making up. These are not substantiated numbers. But you say that, and I don't know what 72% of Medicaid looks like. Like, what is that? I don't know what 500,000 looks like. I had a news director once say, So tell me what 500,000 looks like. And I was like, I don't know. I honestly don't. I come from a town of 3,000. So what? The 125,000 in my towns? Like that doesn't mean anything to me. So in National Geographic, when they hit that idea of we hit the milestone, if you want to call it that, of 500,000 deaths, they said, what does this look like? And they put together something that was really great. It's like losing all the school bus drivers in the US. Well, I can't picture how many buses there are, but I know what it meant to have a school bus driver. And if I think of every one of Kenny, my bus driver in kindergarten, who everyone is gone, that's something I can relate to. They said if each death were marked with the blink of an eye, you'd have to be blinking like this for 14 hours. Okay, I can start to understand, even though I can't do that, that's a lot. If you measured the skies, it's 100 times more than all the stars you can see in the sky. I can start to get that. And then they did one, and Carrie, we talked about this one that was so powerful. They said if you lined up all the caskets of 500,000, it would go from here to, I think, was it Memphis, to Tennessee, and you just picture this line of caskets. And I was thinking about that this morning, and I was like, well, how many deaths have there been now? And it's now like closer to 1.1, 1.2, it's almost 1.2 million deaths as of like a month or so ago. So I was like, well, what would that be? It would approximately be if you'd lined up the caskets from New York to Oklahoma City. And then I thought, well, I still can't picture it. Like, I haven't ever driven from New York to Oklahoma City. So even that I can't quite get in my brain. But then I Googled, how long does it take to drive from New York to Oklahoma City? Guess what? It takes, as they told me, it's 21 hours and 48 minutes. So if you picture, you start right now and you just keep driving, and every mile, every foot along the way, every inch along the way is a casket for 21 hours and 48 minutes. I get it. I get that that's a lot of lives. And I think that's the thing that you can do to make these things real. And you just have to, it's as simple as Google. It's as simple as saying, what's what's the distance between New York and Oklahoma City? Right. And so I think asking that one question about the data, if it's a 73% increase, how many units is that for your company? Is that more than you sold in the first 10 years of your company combined? Like give that perspective, so it's not just a number. Because
Exactly.
also, if it's 73%, is that terrible? Is because you were hoping for 85? Is it phenomenal because you were hoping for 48? Like, you gotta give the perspective of what it means, because otherwise we leave it up to people to interpret it, and you might be thinking you're giving them, like, an amazing sales number, and the CEO walks out of there saying, we ought to do something because we didn't hit the numbers, right? So you've got to think about how you're framing it to make it work. And I think the National Geographic link is a really good reminder of getting yourself past the data as it is and putting it into perspective that it'll sink in.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And we'll share that link with our audience in chat. Highly recommend grabbing that. It's a wonderful, wonderful reference of how to do this well. And I know you and I were chatting because the visuals that we shared were just three of many that National Geographic featured. And as I shared with you, the one that did strike me the most was, and it was a visual of a train. So another way you could give perspective is showing a map of the United States and how long that train stretches going all the way from New York to Oklahoma. I mean, it's pretty chilling. And Reese, you said it so well, one of our audience members, the statistic becomes visual and concrete, not abstract. Yeah. You're making it
You
very
forget numbers, I mean, and I hate to, I've never been able to track this number down. You can read so many articles that say stories are remembered 22 times more than facts alone. I try not to quote that number because I can't find the fact that says it. So, well, even if it's an urban legend, right? Even if it's 11 times more or 3 times more, that going back to this idea of stickiness, what do we want them to remember in 8 hours? We want them to remember, they may not remember the number of 500,000, especially if I said the number today is 1.193165 million, right? Nobody's going to remember that. But if you said, if you if you drove to Oklahoma City, you'd be driving for almost 22 hours and it'd be solid caskets of the victims. That's the kind of thing you go home and you tell somebody else about. So that's
Absolutely.
what you want to do. The visuals aren't to dumb it down. It's to make that data understandable. And
Yeah, yes. I'll just quickly share another example that I heard very recently that really has stuck with me. And this was 2 months ago. I was hosting a Women in Tech conference in Amsterdam, and so I had the great opportunity to introduce at least 30 different presenters and panelists over the course of the 2 days. So I heard a lot of presentations. And one that still sticks with me, and I know will for a very, very long time, was a brief story that an executive from a big corporation told regarding a reverse mentoring program that they have within their organization. And it entails each of the executives having the opportunity to meet on multiple occasions with a neurodiverse uh, colleague within the organization. And this executive was really open and honest. And he, said it wasn't uncommon for him to have 15 minutes, 15 meetings in a single day. And he was struggling a little bit as to why this needed to surface as a priority, given everything else he had responsibility for. So he goes into his first meeting with this individual who was very severely visually impaired. And the individual walks into the executive office with a huge suitcase. And the executive was kind of surprised. He said, "Oh, are you going on holiday after this?" And he said, "No, I wanted to show you the many different devices that I've had to use over the years just to get through a day." And he opens up this suitcase and puts onto the desk all of these different devices that he's dependent on to get through a day. That visual was so compelling, and this executive said it will forever cause him to look at things differently. He cannot go across the campus without wondering, is this truly accessible to everyone within our company? And you can imagine why both the combination of the story and he could have talked about, he could have said, I've used 20 different devices throughout um my life. Not nearly as impactful as knowing that they took up this massive suitcase and, putting them all on his desk.
that it's remarkable, right? And I'm thinking about that in two ways. One, the CEO remembers it and recounts the story and shares learning and vulnerability, right? It takes a lot of guts to say that to a CEO and for a CEO to admit that. And so I think it's amazing to watch that. But I'm also struck by the amount of courage that it took to do that story, because that's a pretty vulnerable place to be. And it could have gone south, right? I mean, like if you were coaching them, I bet there would have been a moment where you were like, "Are you sure you want to do this? How do you think they'll respond? Is it going to look like a shtick? Is it gonna?" And so I think that's the other important part when we think about stories in terms of not dumbing it down, but also making sure that you know your audience so well that it's a risk worth taking. Because
It's such a good point, Emily. Such a
Mhm.
good point.
Stories don't work on everybody if you're picking the wrong story. And so I think it's really important. Like, I can't, if that person came into became a keynote speaker and reeled that into every big stage where they were getting paid 20,000 to speak, people would probably be like, get over yourself. Like, that's just a shtick. It doesn't mean anything. But because it was one-on-one and helping, it didn't seem, it clearly resonated. And so I think that's the important part too. When you're just doing stories, don't get so stuck on one. Don't fall so in love with the story that you don't maybe pressure test it with people and make sure it has the best chance of landing and bringing about the change you want.
Yes, yes, yes. And that, of course, goes back to that audience centric, that audience analysis, which is so critically important. Um, Another question for you. When presenting data live, how do you avoid falling into the data dump trap while still sounding credible and confident?
Yeah, I think you know your headlines. It kinda goes back to that idea before of what is it that you're trying to show. There's another one that I found in the New York Times today that was talking about the disappearing funds for chronic diseases, and it's published. You could find it today live, but it's published from, like, a month ago. But they basically took sorry, it's out of focus.
Yeah.
They basically took all of the, 1,000, almost 2,000 1,389 NIH awards to scientists, to different communities and researchers across the country, and they looked at those and how they ended. So, right, if you were trying to do that and look through an Excel spreadsheet, you would have had something that had 1,389 cells that had here's the location and here was the amount of money and here's all that. And like you would totally get lost in a data dump. It would just be like it would be hard to do. What they did was every one of these, if you click on this, the size is the amount of money, the number of millions that were taken, and you could look at it and see what the location was. So you start to get an idea of how many things they are, but then what they separated it kind of by a sphere, by circle of what it was. And so you start to look at that, and then when you're clicking and you say, "Oh, there was $1.65 million to train pediatricians." Well, I have kids who use a pediatrician. Does that impact me? Maybe so. Reducing tobacco use disparities of 4 million. I'm not a smoker, but I know people who are. What would that do? There was one about there's ironically training new scientists to use big data to advance women's health for $2 million. Well, how the fact that they're using data to talk about data, and we either are all women or know someone who is, there's $2 million that's gone. I think that that was a really effective way to allow you to have this discovery, right? Like I can click through and find things that relate to me or things that say, well, gosh, why were we funding that anyway? Maybe that's a good thing that that's not being funded, right? Like you get a chance to make your own conclusions, but they didn't do it in a searchable database. They did it something that was very, very visual and drove home a picture about I can look at this and tell you what was the biggest amount of money that they cut and what it meant. And then the article that went with it talked about the researchers who were some of those people. So then they dove in and gave us quick, close ideas. I think that's how you avoid data dumps. You start to say, how do we make this accessible to people, and how do we make it so that they can find something that that lights up their brain, either because they agree with it and it could be them, or they disagree with it and they say, well, thank God this administration's making these changes, right? Like I'm not saying this is an advocacy one way or the other. It gives people the data to do with it what they choose to do.
Wonderful. Thank you. That's so helpful. I would add that another thing that I think is critically important, especially for highly technical, detail-oriented people that have a tendency to want to share the data dump, if you will, is the critical importance of preparation and anticipating the questions and objections that you're going to get. Because with uh, preparation, using a solid framework, lots of practice, you can get to a point in which you're able to much more crisply deliver your presentation in a way that's engaging. It's going to resonate with the audience. It's going to drive action. Where things often fall apart is the unexpected and responding to a question. And I'll share another very, very quick example that a very, very successful, he's now a senior leader, uh, came up through the ranks at Microsoft, highly technical. He shared very early on in his career, he was a sales engineer and he was often brought into prospect presentations as kind of a supporting role to give the demo, whatever. And he typically did very, very well in that capacity because he was prepared, he practiced, he rehearsed, got coaching, etc. Uh, in one prospect presentation, one of the executives asked about security. and he knew a lot about security. So he just unloaded and started to share all the wonderful aspects about security of their system. And the sales executive in the back of the room was going, like this, the signal, stop. Because the over explaining almost caused doubt on the part of the prospects. Like, it almost feels like you're defending this a little bit more than you should. So I would say that's another key, is anticipating those questions and objections. And then here again is where frameworks can help. We have headline response example. That's it. That's it. What's the high level response and an example, and then stop. If the audience wants to know more, they can ask.
When I'm doing crisis communications, I say what you need to say and then stop. Exactly that. You it silence can feel uncomfortable if I say what you need to do is simplify, justify, amplify. I could go on for another 5 minutes about what that means, but I could leave it there and then have you ask the question, well, what does that mean? And then we start to have a conversation and a dialogue as opposed to a soliloquy. We're not Shakespeare. We're not putting out these ideas. We're trying to make presentations to make sure we're understanding our audience and getting them to where we are. And so I think
Exactly.
having the courage to let silence sit there is so hard to do, but I think that's such a valuable example that you just shared. We all know the feeling of when we didn't do it right.
Yeah, get comfortable with that pause. Those pauses are powerful. Two more. We are nearly out of time. I'd love to do a coaching scenario. And you've talked a little bit about this, but if you could just build on it so we provide ample how to. If you were handed a slide with way too much data on it, how would you coach someone to turn it into a story on the spot?
On the spot, what's in it for me? And the me is the audience. What is it that they need to take away from it? It's why does this matter? If I don't mean to be repetitive and I don't mean to make it sound too simple, but if you can't ask what, can't say why, you don't know what it is. And it's very quick. We're presenting because we're experts on something. So if you could, the why, it's just having the guts and the courage to say it, I think, is important. We try to prove how much we know. And the thing to remember is we're there because we know what it is. We're there to now be the one who's shining the spotlight on what I need you to see, what's over here. And I think that that's important. So it's as simple as I can say, even you, if you're going into a meeting right after this and you've got to give a slide deck presentation, you only have 30 seconds to look at your slides and you're like, I just want to try something that I just learned. Look at it and say, why does this matter? This one slide, why am I going to do it? And, it might be super obvious and it might be that you're telling them the story of Caitlin Clark and the green dot, right? Like you've got to quickly find the story that matters.
Yeah, yeah. And do you need a slide?
I
Ask
don't
yourself that question.
Or would you be more effective instead of showing that slide, would you be more effective showing, and we don't have a lot of time to do it, but I show people a water bear, a tardigrade, because when I was in Antarctica, I watched a world-class diver scientist talk about to all of us that we needed to go out and find phytoplankton, and we were like, we don't want to see phytoplankton. We came to Antarctica to see penguins and icebergs and seals and things like that. And she kept saying, no, you need to do the phytoplankton. And nobody cared at all. She was brilliant and she was lovely, but I didn't care. We all kind of thought we weren't, we all went to her lecture to be nice. But when we were there and learned about it, we learned that the tardigrade, the water bear, is like indestructible. Scientists have found you can like radiate this thing, you can shoot it into space, it survives, you can freeze it, it survives, it can do all these things. But they're really worried about what happens to it in Antarctica. It eats phytoplankton. If the phytoplankton changes because of climate change, what happens to this? And if this can't survive, which has survived 5 different extinctions, if they're worried about it not surviving this, people haven't survived 5 different extinctions. Like, if this does it, what does it do for us? And so when Chloe told us the story about the water bear, suddenly we were like, oh, this phytoplankton matters a lot more. The next day, the toughest audience ever were the teenagers on the boat, including 2 of my kids. And guess what happened the next day? They said, "Can we go out with Chloe?" And they were out on a zodiac with her, and they started doing science experiments, and they were grabbing, trolling for phytoplankton. And we came back from looking at penguins and this great expedition, and we saw all these teenagers in the room, and they were looking through microscopes, looking for water bear tardigrades, and they were looking at the phytoplankton. And one of the teenagers from Germany said, "This is so much better than the internet. This is so cool." I think of that because then I help scientists understand it's not Chloe was right all along. Chloe had the data. She just hadn't figured out why it mattered to us. As soon as we figured out, thanks to her, about the tardigrade and the water bear, we were like, "Holy cow, Chloe is a visionary. We've got to get on Chloe's team because she sees something we never understood before." Chloe could have shown us all the graphs in the world. We were never going to buy in. She told us the story of this one little thing that looks like a water bear. Look it up. And you start to say, she's onto something. If we don't have that, we don't have penguins. We don't have seals. We don't have icebergs. Right. And so I think that's where you're right. Sometimes you don't need the slides at all. You need something that makes people understand that you know what you're talking about.
Oh, wow. Another incredibly powerful example. 1 minute, Emily. What's your parting advice?
Tell the story, but let the story be the story of the data. Simplify it. All that you've got, all the work you've done, what's the one thing that it's about? Then justify it. You've got the backup. So you did this, and so you proved to me that you've got this for perspective, and then you amplify it. If you don't tell people about it, they're not going to dig into a slide and take action. How many of us do that? But if you start to look at this and say, "Oh, who's believing President Trump right now? What does he have to do? Where's the money being cut? What does that mean to me?" That's where the amplification gets people to take action. And so it's not hard. You just have to free yourself from thinking that the data can do it all on its own. It can't. We can do it so much better and help that data out.
Emily, thank you so much. This has been invaluable. I can tell you, I'm going to remember a whole lot 8 hours from now and 2 months from now. Yes, thank you.
So fun to talk with you.
Audience. What was that, Emily? I'm sorry.
So fun to talk with you about this. I think this matters. This can change every presentation, every call you do for the rest of the day, for the rest of the week. It really can. So thanks for bringing it to amplifying it.
Absolutely. My pleasure. It has been a delight. And this audience has been terrific. Emily, we've got lots of just outstanding feedback and not emojis. What are they called? There's lots of things dancing around our screen in appreciation. So very briefly, I am going to tee up the topic for August Power Speaking Live. This is going to be another super fun one. How we can use improv to transform our speaking skills. I hope to see you next month. And thank you again, Emily, and to our audience.